previously on Supa-Saturdays Draw-Along.
That's why I love to draw, and I wanna create Supa-Saturdays, Supa-Saturdays, Supa-Saturdays Draw-Along.
Please hold your applause. Quick, take the pictures. Grafton's green. In case you don't know where that's from the 1989 Batman movie, the Prince soundtrack. Grafton's green. Anyway, I digress. What am I talking about? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another Supa-Saturdays Draw-Along with me, Jerome Hinds. And as you saw from the recap there, I was inking Goliath from the 1960s Avengers. And you may have also seen on that recap a revision of a viewer's drawing. A lady named Kerry, she's been drawing along, and she was having a problem with a Superman pose. And you probably saw on the introduction some of her corrections. Now, first of all, let me set the mood for our show. Thanks so much for tuning in. And hang on, where's that music? Is it there? Oh yeah, there it is. Hang on. Let me get the right levels. Don't want it too loud. I think my levels are normally at 15. If it's too loud or it's too quiet, please do drop me a note in the messages. So here we are. And I'm going to make this screen bigger. And let's get to, before we get to our exercise, let's get back to Kerry, shall we? And some weeks ago, Kerry was drawing a Superman pose where he was kneeling, and she was having a few constructional problems. So over the messenger, we did a bit of corresponding, and I did a bit of redlining or blue lining. See, here was my take on the right, and this was Kerry's take on the left that I was correcting. And I'll show you what she sent me this week, which was quite amazing. See here, this was Kerry's original that I redlined. And now she's come up with this. Now, excuse the quality because I'm working digitally, but Kerry's working traditionally. So this is just a snapshot with a hand phone. So you know, sometimes hand phones are not the clearest. So I'll zoom in and look at the construction on her shoulders now. Her torso got much more volume. And most impressively, look at those hands. Very nicely formed. And this front foot is now a much better shape and size. So Kerry's done very, very well there. And I think that warrants another set of applause. Well done, Kerry. So yes, so if you're viewing and you're having your problems with something that you're perhaps trying to construct, you know, if you're old school and you're trying to draw from scratch and not use a reference as such, but go in and actually construct from nothing, feel free to drop me a message over on Facebook Messenger, or you can find me at the Madness Entertainment Group. You can see my links in the description box. You'll find me everywhere at Jerome Hinds Art, Instagram, everything. I'm easy to find. So let's have a look at where we are. So you remember last week, we got down to inking original Goliath, right? This is Black Goliath in the foreground. So let's switch off Black Goliath. Yes, I'm working digitally, of course. So all my stuff is in layers. So here's Goliath. And remember, okay, if you want here, I do all of my key lines separately. Now, what do I mean by that? Anywhere there's a different color in a costume, you make sure you do that piece of inking on one layer. As well as, of course, as the outer key line. So there's the main contours, I'd call it. Then you put in the inner detail. That's your muscles, creases in the costume, but the most essential detail. If we go to my pencils, if we go to my spotting, we still have the blacks to put in to Goliath. Yeah, you can see that. Now, we're not going to do that today. What we're going to do is the main inking contours of Black Goliath. So let me switch off Goliath, switch on Black Goliath. I'm going to switch off his spotting and just leave his basic pencils. So we're now going to ink the basic pencils of Black Goliath. So I'm going to make a layer. I'm going to call this, I'm confusing myself here. I call this key lines, KL. Get my inking pen. And I'm using Clip Studio Paint software. And my favorite pen here is the mapping pen. And for my key lines, I had a pen size of 5. So where should we start? Okay, let's start up by the head, shall we? No preference. Now remember, we're only doing the outer key line and main contours of the costume. So I'm going to make my pencils a bit lighter. Now I'm going to get to my inking. And I like thick, thin inking kind of stuff. Now I mentioned before that the light source is coming from their point of impact. So let's have a look. What do I mean by that? This is very old school. Their point of impact will be somewhere here in the center of the screen. So the light source is coming from where the action is going to be. This, of course, is extreme creative license. This kind of thing was made very popular by some of the greats like Jack Kirby. So with that in mind, and there's also a governing light source from above. Typically, that comes from the sun or a light in the ceiling. So my light sources are coming from above or the center. So with that in mind, I do ink my key lines accordingly. So here, I know that this shoulder is near the point of impact. So I'm not going to get too heavy with my inking here. It's going to be bold, but only in certain areas. Now here, in this software, can you see over here something called stabilization? I'm going to switch that to 90. I like stabilization in the software because drawing digitally, digitally, is definitely, in some respects, it is more difficult than traditional. What do I mean by that? Because of course, if you make a mistake digitally, if I've done that wrong, digitally, just Command Z, and I can do it again. Of course, that's easier than if you go wrong with ink manually. But in terms of keeping a steady hand, I find inking digitally way more difficult, actually, than traditional. That line, digitally, especially if you're using a pen tablet. Now, I'm using a Cintiq. That is a screen tablet. I'm drawing directly onto a screen. Now, of course, a lot of the new generation, they're using iPads, which is a similar action. But if you're using a pen and tablet, so you've got to depend on eye-hand coordination, keeping a steady hand is not easy. So I spent many years using a pen tablet. Then I got screen pen tablets. I'm using a Cintiq 24-inch at the moment. And on my other computer, I use a Wacom 1, both Wacoms. The Wacom 1 is a smaller version of a large Cintiq. Very economical, but also very good. And of course, some of you out there are using Huion. I used to use Huion as well. All good stuff. And from what I can gather, Huion has really upped their game. Now, there's some other brands out there like Huion that was second to Wacom. Wacom, of course, is the main brand for digital drawing. And I did give the others a try some years ago. Yes, they were good, but where I found a problem was, sometimes you get something like a Windows update comes in. And some of the other brands were a bit slow to update their drivers. And you might find a period of time where the tablet wasn't functioning at 100%, simply because the updates hadn't come in yet. And that led me back to Wacom. But from what I understand now, that is no longer an issue. Their backends are all pretty good now, apparently. And yeah, Huion's touch sensitivity was pretty good back in the day, back in the mid 2010s. So I've seen a lot of people using them now. So it appears they sorted out their app, so to speak. Now, I'm doing my key line here. You see, I went around the glove because the glove is a different color. But something's happened here. Indeed. We've got to call the art police. Now, why the hell have you called the art police, Jerome Hinds? Well, let me show you. Let me show you what's happened. I think I may have got my costume wrong. Now, did I call the art police by mistake? Hang on. Let me double check something here. I thought I got the costume wrong, but it looks like I didn't. It looks like I called the cops on myself for no reason. Now, I want you to check something with me here. Here's the original Black Goliath. Oh, look. I called the police on myself too quickly. I was thinking that Black Goliath's sleeve came down his bicep, like Captain America. No, it appears it's on the shoulder and bicep joint. And from what I've done here, I'm consistently correct. So cancel that 911 call. I was on point. Ye of little faith. So I shall continue with my inking. Here we are with the glove. And that thumb wraps around the bottom. And you may notice sometimes I may veer off of the pencils. I'm inking myself. Now, this is not advisable so much if you're inking for another penciler, because if you change someone's pencils outside of the directions of the editor, that penciler may not be best impressed with your efforts. And a great old story regarding that kind of stuff was the king of comics, Jack Kirby. There was an inker named Vince Coletta. And apparently Vince Coletta was notorious for changing King Jack's pencils. He would do stuff like not ink all the people in the background. And a lot of people go after Vince Coletta for that. But I can understand, Stan Lee and those guys, those publishers from yesteryear. I mean, they used to meet their deadlines. There was no such thing as missing a deadline in their day. So if you're Vince Coletta, you got a wife and kids, the bills to pay, and Jack Kirby's out there getting a bit excited, drawing crowd scenes at the heralding of Silver Surfers visiting the earth, etc., etc., you might be tempted to miss out a bit of King Jack's detail. Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but as I always say to people, I don't have a reason, but I do have a good excuse. How about that for an explanation? But for whatever the reasons was, sometimes Vince Coletta would miss out some of King Jack's details on his pencils, apparently. Us, the readers, of course, we didn't have a clue because there was no internet in those days. We just saw what was on the page. We haven't got a clue that he's missing out detail. This only became apparent in later years with the advent of things like, websites and Wizard magazine, which share this intel. Now, you may wonder why I'm not inking that collar. It's because the entire collar is yellow. That inner detail would come with the inner contours inking layer. So now we put in the back of the mask, I'm going to put a few creases behind there. And his mask comes down his neck. You know, I do love these Silver Age costumes, you know, and Bronze Age. And I think I mentioned before on one of the streams that I, Jerome Hinds, I have no concept of what people call corny or camp. I am Mr. Corn and I am Mr. Camp. In fact, I don't even respect those terms. If someone says to me, the movie was a bit camp, then I know I'm going to watch that movie. Or if they say the costumes are a little bit, what's that word I'm looking for? Someone accused my comic of this once. What's that word? Not rambunctious. You know, I've had some criticisms in the past that were extreme compliments, but the person criticizing me didn't realize. Oh, hang on a second. The word's coming to me. It's so not auspicious. God, my memory. There's a word that a guy accused my costumes of being, and it was an absolute pleasure to hear that. I went to Comic-Con once, and one editor criticized me, said that I suffered from Jack Kirbyitis. And I said, what the hell is Jack Kirbyitis? He goes, well, the page isn't big enough for you to fit your detail onto it. Man, I walked away from that guy. I thought it was God. He compared me to Jack Kirby. Any problems that Jack Kirby have, I would willingly endorse. Oh, dear. The things that we go through as comic artists. Hang on, I don't know the shape of that. And I'm trying to remember that word that the person criticized my costumes of being guilty of. It's not rambunctious. It's another word for like Gary. Well, I can't remember that word this morning. If you're watching from the States, if you're across the pond, it's 6+ in the evening. I'm coming to you from Singapore, and it's 7+ in the morning here. Indeed, I've had to get out of bed early to be here with you fine people. Hang on a second, I can't hear my music. Is my music playing? It's awfully quiet. Now I'm scared to turn it up because my readings were normally 15. Okay, I'm going to go up to just about 20. Hopefully that's okay. Yeah, that should be okay. No, I'm still not happy with the shape of this eye socket. My pencils, I don't think are that accurate. Let me get rid of a bit of that. Good. I'm not putting in that inner contour of the mask because the whole mask is one color, as I mentioned before. Now, I'm not going to put any ambiguous lines on the hairline here, because I'm going to assume that Black Goliath has had a trip to the barber and he's got a nice razor edge. But for the outer hair, I'm going to be a bit more organic with the hairline. There. I've got one student who I saw draw some hair recently, and it was a little bit wobbly like this. So I says to him, what kind of hairstyle is that? He goes, it's like yours. So I thought, fair enough. That explains everything. I didn't realize that the character was a black guy. But you know, it's a bit like manga and superhero comics, yeah. You know, everyone tends to look the same. You know, the facial structures and everything are very similar. You can only really tell the ethnicity from things like hair texture. So his character, he's a local student, so his characters were looking quite manga-like. So I assumed that the characters were of Asian descendancy. Now, should I have made that belt? Hang on. This top color of the belt here. Let me check my... Yeah, the belt's a different color. Now, I don't like the volume of the belt here. I'm making the belt slightly thicker there and thicker under here. And now we can call the costume police, because if we look at Black Goliath's costume, can you see the window in the stomach piece of his costume comes down to the belt? If we draw through the object, let's go back to our pencils here, yeah? If we draw through the object, we should have seen the bottom of that costume underneath the fist, correct? So let's remedy that. The window to his costume we would see there. Now again, there's a pattern on the middle of his belt. Here's the center. Let me go back to my penciling layer. Let's do this right, boy. Let's do this correct. It's like a V shape, or more like an A shape, sorry, going upwards. So there should have been a line about here and about there. Remember, I thickened that belt line just now, so I'm going to change it on that layer. So yeah, the belt is something like that. So let's go back to our inking layer. Oh, sorry, that detail we don't put here, because that's within the yellow. That's going to go into our detail layer. So if you look at, see Black Goliath, he's got his pants outside, but his pants are the same color as his leggings. So we just take the key line down the outside. There. Down the outside. There. Good. For the outer leg. That comes in. Joins there. My morning allergies. I've got the sniffles. Put in a calf muscle there. So the change in yellow is here. So we only ink that part of the boot, not the inner fold. And we're going to ink the outer edge of the boot. Whoops. Keep your hand steady, boy. Come down the outer edge. The Outer Limits. Fantastic TV show. The Outer Limits. If you're old enough to remember that, good on you. I'm surprised that they haven't revamped it, you know, like Netflix or something, and updated Outer Limits kind of TV show. Or maybe they have. One thing I've noticed that, I mentioned that I'm in Singapore. What we get on Netflix compared to you guys out in the West is very different. I dare say that you guys have got a much better choice of shows. We do not really get much of a look in with new material, I've noticed. Now, hang on a second. His boots are all one color, right? That means that we should not have this. We do not need this line. All of in here will be yellow when we come to do our color dump later. Outer boot. Now, you might think it's overly pedantic to do my inner contours on a different layer. But what's the old adage? Those who fail to plan are planning to fail. I do like that. And it's all about when it comes to the coloring stage, right? If you've got a big area, just to paint bucket. If you're new to digital coloring, paint bucketing is when you put a massive color into one area with just a click of your stylus or mouse. That's right. I'm old enough to remember when we would draw digitally with a mouse. This is way before the days of pen tablets. And before the century of tablets. You're talking about the, sorry, let me get a tissue here. My nose is streaming. Allergic Jerome. Yeah, you're talking about the 1930s, not 1930s, 1990s. I'm not that old. Yeah, we would be drawing with a mouse. I remember I was working for the British Met Office in the art studio. And I went to the job interview and they told a lie. I said I could use Photoshop. Now, back in those days, okay, the Mac was new, but imaging wasn't really that big yet. So you had programs like Illustrator were around, but that's all vector drawing. If you're familiar with this kind of stuff, Illustrator works on a vector system, not pixels. So I was okay with, no, I wasn't even that good with Illustrator yet. What I was using was a word processing program called RSG, Ready, Set, Go. And that was mainly used just for page layout in advertising and design. No real illustration, very basic. So I went to this job interview and I said that I could use Photoshop and Illustrator. But could I heck? I knew of them. I knew a little bit about them, but I wasn't proficient. And I'd done some drawings with a mouse. And the art director thought my drawings with a mouse were pretty good. He didn't know I was a budding comic book artist. And okay, I'm biased. I think comic book artists, I think we're amongst some of the best artists in the world because we have to draw from imagination, which is actually not easy. So I got the job, but I didn't know how to use the equipment. But luckily for me, it was what you call a public holiday. And I stole into the office. I fired up those programs. I went to the library and got a book. And I had a crash course in how to use Photoshop and Illustrator that weekend. And I also had a Mac back at my place. And I bought the programs. Back in those days, you could buy programs. You didn't have to there was none of this subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. You'd buy the program. So it came the next working day. The man thought I was a genius. I was very proficient with those softwares. Okay, we've got this bit of leg over here to do. Oh, seem to have a few people watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. Well, to Supa-Saturdays Draw-Along with me, Jerome Hinds, here on the Madness Entertainment Group. And we're doing the Craft of the Goliaths. I'm inking my key lines here. As I mentioned, there's a light source coming from where these Goliaths are going to clash. So you notice that the inking on this leg, on this outer side, it's a little bit lighter than this underside. That's to pick up. It's going to greatly accentuate the light source as we get into the spotting. So now we're going to do the inner contours on a different layer. So you see here with Goliath, we have a key line, then in the detail. So I'm making a new layer. ID, inner detail. Now look at me. I'm getting too excited here. I did not finish his eyes. They're obviously a different color. No, I'm not overly impressed with my sketch here, I must say. So I'm going to try to do a bit of doctoring as I do these eyes here. Let me have a look. I'm going to change the eye socket here slightly. Let me see how this looks. Get the corner of this eye more up. Yeah, I think I prefer that. Get a perspective in the eyeball. Okay, let's put a highlight in as you're looking up. A little bit of a double eyelid you can see in the eye. Yeah, that's better. I prefer this shape. Good. Now let's go to our inner detail. So here, let's start with the face. We can put in the jawline here. We're putting some ear detail. The folds in the ear. There. Let's put those creases at the back of the mask. These neck sinews. Let's get a collarbone going. This is when I discover I'm on the wrong layer. After all these years, look at me. I haven't, my keyline layer. If you want to save any kind of mistakes, lock your layers. I call this layer etiquette. Lock your layers. Stop accidents from happening. Oh dear, my nose. We get the center of the chest coming up here. Get a contour coming in here for the collarbone. Now we've got this collar. We can finish put the detail in for that. Just round that off a bit. And is that a crease that I put behind it in the collar? I don't think that's necessary. I don't know what I was thinking there. Maybe I was thinking something else. Good. We can put in the details of the face here. So curve the nose, nostril. I remember when I first, Jim Starlin had this way of accenting only one side of the nose. I remember as a kid, if you don't know who Jim Starlin is, he's a legendary comic artist and writer. He's one of these people that can write and draw. And back when I was a kid, he took over the Marvel Comics Captain Marvel series. And Jim Starlin was known for drawing big muscles. And the way he would draw faces, I also kind of liked as well. He had this way of creating an impression of just one side of the nose. And I still do that to this day. I still like it. Good. We've got in the main contours for the face here. Let's continue with sinews from the shoulder. Continue the collarbone through the costume. Come out of the darkness. Center the chest. I'm looking at this costume from the sort of thing that people would say nowadays. And they would think this costume, this window in Black Goliath's midriff and chest is absolutely ridiculous. That's something that surprised me about the first Captain America movie. I don't know if you, the first Captain America movie I thought was really, really good. They found a way of portraying the 1940s Captain America in a really cool way. I did like the way they did that, the way that movie was made. I thought it was really, really good. And, you know, of the recent, I say recent, but you know, the last 15, 10, 15, 20 years. The Avengers movie, when Ant-Man reversed his polarity and became Giant Man, I can tell you right, I was well into my 50s when that movie was released. I nearly lost my mind like a child when I saw Giant Man. I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in a movie. Absolutely brilliant. Now I'm going to raise this finger here. Hang on a second, that's a bit too much. Possibly my favorite artist of all time, chap by the name of Gil Kane. I can never decide out of Gil Kane and Jim Starlin who was my absolute biggest influence. But I have to say, no, I can't. Boy, it's such a difficult one, you know. I mean, Jim Starlin did something that I can't forgive him for. He did the graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel. And I know it's, you know, certain things, anything involving death always gets respect. But I think that was the single worst thing to ever happen in comicdom. And I know I might be a minority there, but to me, that was just a really terrible occurrence to have killed that character off. Just cannot agree with that. But I'm biased. I was a Captain Marvel kind of guy. So of course, you know, I'm never gonna accept them killing him off. But it was a very, very successful graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel. And yeah, I dare say people did enjoy the story, but not for me, son. Marvel. You know, sometimes like when I'm teaching young kids, I'll tell them that Captain Marvel was my favorite character. And what they think about are the movies, you see. And the Captain Marvel movies weren't the most successful, let's say. So they look at me in bewilderment, thinking like, why do you like Captain Marvel? Then I explained to them that Captain Marvel, in the Marvel universe, you know, started off, well, it was a guy, the first thing. Not meaning that just because it's a girl in the movie that it has to be bad. I mean, look at Wonder Woman. I mean, that's not the implication. But they had no idea that the character had so much history. So then what I would often do is I would give them the elevator pitch for the character. And then they would see the genius of the original character as conceptualized by the great Stan Lee, the late great Stan Lee. So here's the elevator pitch of the original Captain Marvel of the MCU, yeah? You check this out. A soldier from a superior alien nation is sent on a reconnaissance mission to the planet Earth. But on arriving and settling here, he fell in love with the people, and from being its potential enslaver, becomes its greatest protector. Now let's listen to that as a synopsis. I mean, I didn't do the best job there, but you get the picture. He's an alien. His race of people are superior. They have every intention of overtaking the Earth, but he gets here. He finds out that we're not a bad bunch, and he goes against his people to overtake us. And if you like, he becomes a traitor to his people, but on a humanitarian grounds. What an amazing concept. You know, it was a bit of a rip-off of Superman, yes. But you could say it was inspired by Superman. You can't call it a rip-off. And I think that concept by Stan Lee was absolute pure genius. And for whatever reason, over the years, that message has been diluted with that character. Until if you ask the average person, what's the main motivation behind the original Captain Marvel? A lot of people haven't got a clue. Completely destroyed. Now you can tell I'm getting rather emotional here. About my favorite character. God, I'm such a geek. That's the thing, when I met my wife, right, she was laughing at me once because we was in a comic shop. And there was a guy in the comic shop, he was complaining about a comic being a bit stupid. And he went on to explain that the reason why he didn't like the comic was that the characters' powers were not well fleshed out. They were not believable. And he said, the guy says this, right? He says, Spider-Man, Peter Parker being bitten by an irradiated spider, and he gets the powers of a spider. I can understand that. I can accept that. My wife, just being a typical woman, that, if you like, she burst out laughing. The fact that we can accept such a thing. But you understand what the guy means, right? When a character has powers, there has to be a gravity to it. There has to be a logical explanation to why this character has powers. And I think it was an old Image comic of some description. One of the characters wasn't well thought out. And this guy in the comic shop, oh man, he was having none of it. He thought the character was ill-conceived. I'll never forget that story. Very, very funny. Now, what we're saying about these inner contour lines, there, that entire boot is yellow. So this line is an incidental, if you like. Okay, I was just talking about Jim Starlin, right? Now you see this square front of the boot? I cannot take credit for that. That is 100% Jim Starlin. With a whiff of Gil Kane. Any of you old viewers out there, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, boy. Put a few creases in the boot here. Come over the other side. There's a couple of comments there. I wonder if there's anything urgent. Hey, yo. Okay, that's the editor emeritus. That must be Pops in the house. Boldcat. Hey, what's up, brother? That's obviously Stephen from Boldcat. Thanks for tuning in, Stephen. I'm here geeking out with my footwear, being inspired by Jim Starlin and Gil Kane. The foot position is quite Gil Kane, but the shape of the shoe is all Starlin. Oh my God. The levels of geeking is off the scales. Pandemic levels. Was it pandemic? Pandemic. Get my pronunciations correct in a minute. Put some folds in the boot. And that boot, you notice those boots are pretty big? That's all Gene Colan. Oh, God. I feel sorry for any viewers here under the age of, what should I say? Under the age of 40 doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about. But okay, take this as a learning curve. Right, you got what I just mentioned, Gene Colan. Do some research on Gene Colan. You got Jim Starlin and Gil Kane. If you're one of the younger viewers and you're interested in what I'm talking about, if you're not interested in what I'm talking about, fair enough. But go and check out those names, man. Those are some serious comic artists. Jim Starlin is still with us. He's much younger than those guys were. He came about in the 70s. Gil Kane and Gene Colan, these guys come from the Silver and Bronze Age. So they're no longer with us. I never got to meet or see those people in the flesh. In fact, I was at the 1998 San Diego Con, and Gil Kane made an appearance at that con, but I went to Disneyland with the wife and my then very young daughter. And I have to say, I rue the fact that I didn't stay behind to see Gil Kane in the flesh. I think I should have postponed that trip to Disneyland. In hindsight, so to speak. Okay, I think I've done my main in a detail. So let's switch off my pencils. There's Black Goliath's main inking. So what I do is, I will, just so we can see what's going on. What's going on? I'm going to put a whiteout layer behind him. So I select outside, I invert, that's Control-Shift-I, or I'm using a Mac. That's Command-Shift-I. I'm going to make a new layer. I call it WO, white out. And I fill it with white. There. Now you might notice that I'm working on a paper texture. I like doing that. I like penciling on a paper texture. It just gives me a different feeling. Okay, so now I can switch him. He's on. I switch on the other Goliath. I switch off his spotting. So we just got his contours. No, I think I've been a bit of a naughty boy. I thought I inked the first Goliath with a brush that was fine. But look at that. What a terrible mistake I made there. Now, I think, you bear with me, I think this is definitely a time where we can do this. Indeed, the art police. Because teacher Jerome has used the wrong thickness brush. He's been so busy talking about Gene Colan that I got my brush sizes wrong. Look at the size of Goliath's inking here, right? It's keyline. Whoops, let me get the right color. That's a bit too thick. Look at this, this is embarrassing. I didn't even record what size brush I used. You know, I think it was a 6. It wasn't a 5. God damn. Okay, so that means I'm gonna have to go back to my key lines here. And I'm gonna have to embellish them. Where did I get that word from? Back in the day, I would see Stanley use the word embellish for inking. So I'm gonna have to come in here. Now it's dangerous doing this because you could end up making the lines too thick. But you call yourself a teacher boy, using the wrong size. Do you know how much I scold my students for doing what I'm doing now? That is terrible. But look at that. I'm doing it in plain sight. I'm not hiding anything. I'm true up. I'm but a man. An incompetent man, but a man all the same. So I'm gonna go over this black Goliath. I'd make his key lines more correct. Funny thing, halfway through that, I was looking at my inking thinking like, these lines are looking a bit anemic. Maybe I should check. But no, I soldiered on. And they said, I gotta be careful that I don't end up making these lines too thick. Yes. And And remember, Black Goliath is in front of Goliath, which means if anything, his key lines would be thicker than Black Goliath. So now I'm going to take my pen. I'm taking my inking pen up to 7. You know, to get a depth of panel, you want your characters nearer to the camera to have a thicker key line. So if anything, Black Goliath's lines should be slightly thicker, but not too thick, of course. No, I'm going to stick with the 6. I'm going to stick with 6. 6, 7. What the hell is 6, 7, eh? You keep talking about that. I ain't got a clue what's going on with that. They're thick, thin, thick, thin. I call cloth organic material. Armor, inorganic. I tend not to vary the thicknesses of my lines. Right under the boot, I'll make thick because the shadow of the boot would fall on to the lower foot. The soles of the feet, thick line. That is definitely going to have shadow underneath his form. So I'm going to put a thick deadweight line underneath the foot. Now, I just used the term deadweight. I learned that from Gary Martin. Gary Martin is a great inker who's written a couple of books. I think he's got a new book out, actually. And he used to ink for Steve Rude on the Nexus independent comic. And I bought his book back in the 1990s about inking. And I learned a lot from that book. Very good book. And he even had guest inkers in there. People like Terry Austin. He gave what he did for his book was he gave the same image to a group of different inkers and showed you how they inked the same page. Absolutely brilliant. Inking is a very uncelebrated job, but it is very important. There was a movie with Chris Rock called, was it Mallrats? And I think Chris Rock's a bit of a comic geek in real life. And he makes an appearance in there and he accuses an inker of being a tracer. My God, that thing is so funny. And the thing is, I mean, okay, he could have been given the script, but there's something about when something's authentic. You can look at Chris Rock's performance and you could tell that he knew that what he was doing was acting. He actually knew what an inker was. And you could tell he got a particular kind of satisfaction from telling that joke. I mean, being a comedian, he liked the fact that he was saying that when he knows that it's clearly not true. Quite amazing. You're a tracer. God, that was so funny. But it's true. A lot of people think that inkers are tracers, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. To some degree, as you could say they're tracing, but to turn a pencil line into definitive black or shadow does take some skill. Okay, I can tell you this. If you've been here for any length of time today, you've heard me talking about one of my comic art gods, Jim Starlin. Jim Starlin is an extraordinary penciler. concepts guy, total genius. But he's also possibly the worst inker I've ever seen. I kid you not. Go and hunt down Jim Starlin inked books. And I will boldly say, on the Madness Entertainment Group, I will make this declaration that I, wannabe comic artist Jerome Hinds, can ink better than Jim Starlin. How about that for confidence? If you happen to be listening, Mr. Starlin, you're invited to a live ink-off, because you are indeed one of my gods of penciling. But I've seen some of your inking, sir. And you should be ashamed. That's a pretty bold statement, right? But seriously, his inking is very, very dodgy, to say the least. And that actually taught me part of the lesson that, yeah, inking is not for everyone. I teach comic art here in Singapore, and I can tell you that I come across some really great pencilers in this part of the world. In this country, you know, some of them work in the film industry as storyboard artists, but you know, they've done the odd comic here and there. And I learned a long time ago that there are some really great pencilers, but these people will never, ever, ever be able to ink. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think patience might have something to do with it, because anyone out there who does penciling, you know, right, we can pick up a pencil, we can flash a few lines here and there, and things are happening. With inking, you ain't flashing nothing. If you don't ink accurately, you're going to be exposed in seconds. It's a total precision game. You can't bluff it. You can, if you're a very organic inker, you can look for a pencil with an organic penciling style, and you can get away with some very sketchy kind of impressionistic inking lines. Yeah, sure. But if you look at manga, and the bulk of superhero comics is precision inking. No, okay, maybe I'm sounding a bit like a dinosaur now. If you look at a lot of modern superhero comics now, needless to say, I'm not impressed, because that's very impressionistic. The penciling and the inking, everything, the coloring, everything's all over the place. And that comes from people who can't actually draw or ink in a very tight way. And they're using a lot of references. So that a lot of the superhero comics disciplines now are very different from the stuff that I kind of teach and proliferate. So I don't mind telling people that I'm an old git, and some of the things that I'm teaching could be deemed as somewhat outdated. Yeah, if you look at some of the modern superhero comics, that artwork is very, very, very loose and unprecise. But if that's what the market wants, you know, the publishers, Marvel and DC, they've got to go that way. If that's really what the market wants. Forget about people like myself. We got one foot in the grave, man. Though secretly, of course, I don't believe they're right. I still think precision artwork would sell more, but maybe not. I'm not surprised that manga's outselling superhero comics at all in America. The discipline behind the art, everything is just more, it's just different. I mean, it's a free world. We're all free to like whatever we like. You know, you got to follow what you like. You can't force yourself to like something that you don't like. And maybe Marvel and DC have done their market research. And when you get more old school like artists on a book, it doesn't sell. So they've got to try something different. But things like My Hero Academia, sorry, which I believe is selling very well, it's still quite traditional in its art approach. But maybe that works for manga, but wouldn't work for a superhero book. I'm not really sure. There, naughty boy has gone over his inking key lines. Or I need to go on the back of his head. Absolutely terrible. Now let's put on other Goliath. Okay, that's a bit better. You silly boy. And I'm working digitally. Am I or am I not? I'm working digitally. So what do we have to say? Save! Again, save! Indeed, save. But I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I come from an era of when when computers were very, very unreliable. And they used to crash a lot. But I tell you what, modern computers do not crash half as much as they used to. So the saving thing doesn't seem to be, dare I say, it doesn't seem to be as required as it used to be. But it's still needed. You still do need to save your work. Now, I'm going to also make his mask line a little bit thicker. Now, Supa-Saturdays Draw-Along, this is why I urge you to get your stylus, pencils, and pens, and draw along with me. And this show runs for 1.5 hours. So I'm here from 6 to 7:30 Eastern time. So we've got about half an hour left. We've got one comment here. Acres of movies. Our regulars here. Your favorite action comedy scene? Thank you for Stacy. What's up, Stacy? My favorite action comedy scene. Let me think. I don't suppose when Ant-Man became Giant Man, that's not really a comedy scene, is it? That was actually quite serious. I must confess, the modern Marvel movies that had all the comedy and stuff in it, I kind of take my superheroine quite seriously. That sounds ridiculous, right? But let me think. What did I think was funny? Remember when Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, was practicing using his powers, and he wasn't very good, and he swung into a wall when he was practicing. I thought that was very funny. Yeah, I thought that was very funny. Okay, so now we've reached a stage where we're going to get to our rendering, our spotting, our blacks. So we started with Goliath. We did Goliath's main inking first. Let's do our spotting then on Black Goliath first. So here's what we got to spot. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make a new layer. Call it spotting. I'm going to lock my other two layers because I'm telling you what, in my old age, the amount of times that I've been selecting the wrong layer in recent times, it's very, very worrying. So look at that. Look at that for etiquette. I've actually locked my two layers that I do not want to interfere with. So now I'm going to come in here on my spotting layer and put down some blanks, baby. Okay, I'm going to make my spotting, my pencils a little bit lighter. And now I'm going to start to ink. So the first thing that I do is I will go around, as in normal spotting, right? I'm just going to go around the areas that I want to be solid black. Again, you might find me making subtle tweaks to parts of the inking that the penciling maybe doesn't reflect, because I'm inking myself. But as I mentioned, if you're inking someone else, be careful of taking creative license. I think I told the story once before on here. I was once speaking to Joseph Rubinstein, who was a fantastic inker. And he was working on a job for a very, very popular artist. I won't say who the artist was. And the artist was also a writer. So, obviously this guy's working very hard. He's doing all these jobs. But he chose Joseph Rubinstein and another gentleman by the name of Klaus Janssen. He chose these two guys to be his inkers. And the reason for that is, when he did his pencils, he did minimal amount of detail. And Joseph Rubinstein and Klaus Janssen, in their own right, can draw. So he could afford to leave out lots of key detail because he knew his inkers could, for want of a better term, finish the panels. And quite a funny story, I thought. Yeah. Joseph Rubinstein is a very, very good inker. And I quite enjoyed that story when he told me that. I met him once because we were all working on a charity book for comic artists that had fallen on hard times. Some of these artists that we see, right, from yesteryear, people that I'm ranting and raving about there, not all of them, but some of those guys there in later life didn't have much money. And there's a charity called ACTA, and they would often hold events or publish books, and the proceeds would go towards artists from yesteryear that in old age, as they became older and they aged out, they would donate the proceeds to these artists. And I was working at the time for a publisher named Mecca. And it later changed its name to Century Comics. And that's how I got to be able to speak to people like Joseph Rubinstein and even work on a story with Tom DeFalco. He's a more of a modern day kind of great writer and editor. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was the longest serving editor-in-chief in history of Marvel Comics. Tom DeFalco. And he actually scripted the first ever My Character Singapore Sling. He scripted the first ever Singapore Sling story. I did the plot and he actually put the words to it. That's one of my claims to fame. And during that time, I was talking to a lot of the guys, a lot of the pros from the industry. And yeah, that's when Joseph Rubinstein told me that story about the artist who handed him and Klaus Janssen partially drawn pages. And they had total creative license to finish all those panels. But if I had Joseph Rubinstein as my inker, I'd be tempted to do the same thing. Because my God, that man can ink. Another great inker that I don't hear anyone really talking about. He worked on the Legion of Superheroes, not Legion of Superheroes, what am I talking about? He worked on the Justice League. I think during the Grant Morrison run, a guy named Prentice Rollins. My God, that man can ink. In fact, I remember once I was doing a drawing and I was trying to emulate Prentice Rollins' style of inking. And I actually achieved something pretty close to it. And I shouted out at the top of my voice in my studio, my home studio. I shouted out, "Prentice Rollins." And my wife comes through the door. I said, "Who are you talking to?" Ah, dear. Maybe I should be sharing stories there. That sounds a bit dodgy. But don't you often shout out things that just sound good? And if you're feeling particularly euphoric, I see nothing wrong with exclaiming something at the top of your lungs. That means something to you, maybe no one else, but who cares? I know, I'm not sure if he still does it, but the original Human Torch, when starting to fly, would shout out, "Flame on, flame on." And quite often, when we were kids, one of my older brothers, when going upstairs, he would shout out, "Flame on," and they run up the stairs. And I never forgot that. And there was some chat group on Facebook with people. There are other people out there who shout out nonsense that they read in comics, and I was shocked. I shouldn't be really. And, a lot of people, if you look at memes, a lot of memeing is kind of this culture, to be honest. And some guys in there was talking about things that they shout out. And I asked them about, does anyone shout out "Flame on" when going up the stairs? And one guy replied, this is a grown man, right? He replies, "No, but I will do from now on." Oh, God. It's great to influence people in such a manner. But any Doctor Strange fans out there, I used to regularly shout out, "Pana." I have no idea what Stan Lee was talking about, but that's the genius of Stan Lee, right? He would write these things by the hoary hosts of Hogarth. That sounds real. That sounds like it is actually a thing. God, man. Comic geekery. How are we doing? How are we doing for time? Still got 15 minutes. I've got a few trailers to run today, so I'd like to share them with you later. In fact, I've got a new show coming up here on the Madness Entertainment Group, exclusive to Roku. And you know what? Why are you talking so much, boy? Why don't we just run the trailer and show those people at home? Show them what's going down, man. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna run you a couple of extracts of what my new Roku show is gonna be about. Should be coming to you in March, from March. So let me pause my music. And here's a couple of trailers for my upcoming Roku special with Madness Entertainment Group. Hope you like it. I hope you tune into it when it airs, probably sometime in March. Okay, so here we are. I've got a couple of trailers. Where's my credits? Look at this. You call yourself an editor, boy? Okay, there's a forward, but it's actually I don't know. Have I lost? Oh, here it is. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the opening credits, and I'm going to run a teaser for my upcoming show in Roku. I'll see you back here in a few minutes.
ACK, panels out and comic book knowledge. ACK, panels out and comic book knowledge. ACK, panels out and comic book knowledge. ACK, panels out and comic book knowledge.
Hello there. My name is Jerome Pac-Man Hinds, and I'd like to start with a most sincere thank you for you joining me here on PACK, PAC, by the Madness Entertainment Group. I'm the president of the Association of Comic Artists Singapore. I regularly teach students of all ages about the art form of visual storytelling. I'm an indie publisher and have worked on many books over the past years, but much more on this later. PAC will be a show that touches on almost every aspect of comic book and manga creation. Paneling, art, in fact, all comic book knowledge, which includes the bits that people rarely talk about, like essential tips on how to letter and save space, or solve ugly page layouts. If only we all knew what we later discover as adults, eh? Now, do it! So you saw that and you heard that. So yeah, that's what PAC is going to be all about. Panels, art, and comic book knowledge. And the main difference between that and what I'm doing here, and some of you may know also, very late on a Friday night, I'm with Raoul Monsieur. We have a show here on Madness called Late Night Art Attack, right? The main difference between the shows is Late Night Art Attack is me and Raoul drawing different things every week and just discussing comics in general, but it's more of an art stream. This Supa-Saturdays is more of a tutorial where I go slower and I talk through processes, and you're invited to join me here. PAC will be different in that it won't just be drawing, it will actually be pointing out things from publications I've been involved in, and also publications that have other more established artists, old books, etc., and exploring why perhaps a writer or an artist did something that they did. And things even like page layout and the makeup. You know, when you give something to a printer, you got to make sure your pages are done in a way that the printer can actually understand. And these are things that really give, would-be comic artists and enthusiasts a lot of problems. So you name it, we'll be going through it with the PAC Roku show. I'm very much looking forward to that. But it's a lot more work than a normal stream. I'm just coming on here, I'm doing a drawing and talking. That actually takes preparation. You got to plan every episode. And I'm not a veteran of the streaming world, so it's been somewhat of a baptism of fire preparing for the first episode. Let's say that. But hopefully you're tuned in for that. Funny thing, here in Singapore, Roku isn't so much of a big thing here. But I think that is changing though. I saw it somewhere here the other day. So, it's like anything. Things take a while to catch up in different regions of the world. And this Roku thing seems like great fun. I've got some friends out there in the States that are big into the Roku thing, as is the Madness Entertainment Group. Roku. So here I'm spotting the mask area. I'm making a few changes here as I do the spotting. I think an inker does have creative license to change a lot of spotting as designated by an artist. I think as compared to pure structure, there is more license in this area as compared to structure. There's more license in the area of spotting, light and dark, shadows. I like shadows around the eyes. Another great artist who sadly passed away recently. Actually, I don't want to tell a lie. Did he pass? Yeah, I think he did. Sal Buscema. No, I don't want to get my facts wrong here. Maybe it was just a rumor that he passed away. I'm not sure. if that's actually true. But he had this way of drawing Captain America, where he would put a shadow on the chest and on the head. I don't know why he did it, but it was whatever it was absolutely brilliant the way he did it. He was the only one that used to do it, from what I can tell. When we got that light source coming from in front of Black Goliath, so kind of taking that into account. Putting shadows on faces is always a bit tricky because you never want to overdo it. Put an accent on that crease on the inner nose there. Now we've got a nice shadow on the inner collar that would push his face forward. Now, you see this little white gap that I'm leaving outside of the spotting? That's called an accent. And if you understand light and dark, you can draw something quite badly, you know. But if you get your lighting right, people will think you can draw. So long as you understand light and dark, you'll get away with a lot of things in drawing. But it is a bit of a catch-22. If you don't understand light and dark, by definition, you might struggle to know how to draw. We were discussing on Late Night Art Attack early this morning, the whole thing about lighting, because we had a viewer on who works in special effects in the film industry. In fact, it's from my native UK, and he came on and he was mentioning the importance of a DOP, director of photography. And it is very, very true that when you look at a movie, I always say this to people, we've all heard the term before, a B-grade movie means the movie is not the best in the world. And we readily think to ourselves, maybe the acting is not the best, maybe the directing is not the best. But actually, quite often, what makes a movie look B-grade, it's not the acting or the directing, it's actually the lighting. If you've got a world-class DOP on a budget movie, people will think that movie is punching way above its weight. The average viewer. Your script could be quite bad. Your acting could be quite bad. But if your lighting is on point, you will immediately get a certain amount of respect from the viewer the minute they look at the production. And pretty much the same can be said for drawing as well. If you've got a light source going and it's looking pretty accurate or pretty decisive, your art could be perceived as being of a higher standard than it actually is. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword. If you do a lot of spotting, with light sourcing in mind, and you get it totally wrong, it can look like a mess. Sometimes you often see this with portfolios of inexperienced artists. I know this because I did it. We all do it. Someone's put a piece of shading somewhere because maybe the space looked empty. So they just thought they had to put something there. And this piece of shading has no relationship to the rest of the drawing. But of course, when you're young, your eye's not as discerning. And you just think you filled the gap and you've done the job. But of course, to a seasoned art director, someone reviewing portfolios, they know that that line you just put in has no real meaning. And immediately these guys would pick up on it when they're looking at your work. And it can be quite a harrowing experience for a young artist. When you get older, you realize that you mustn't take these things personally. I've told the story before on Late Night Art Attack. The same 1998 Comic Con that I went to, I showed my work to a comic legend named Neil Adams. He's another major influence on me. Very, very big. I mean, everyone says that. That's why I tend to not name him when I'm talking about my influences. It sounds so cliched. Yeah, Neil Adams affected me. But he definitely affected me. Well, anyway, this is before the days of the internet. So I had never seen a picture of him before. But he had a booth and his name was outside. So I knew, that's the only way that I knew who it was. So I says to my wife, hey, look, it's Neil Adams. I want to show him my work. So there was no one in the booth at the time. So I walks up to him and I says, excuse me, Mr. Adams, can I show you my work? And he goes, sure, come in, come in. So I went in and I showed him my drawing. And he took a while. Then he looked at me and he says, now, you need to learn how to draw. And I wasn't offended at all. My wife was greatly offended on my behalf. And then he puts his hands on my shoulders like this. And he says, this is Neil Adams talking to you. Great story. I always tell it. And yeah, man, that's how I met him. But he was right. The things that he pointed out to me in my artwork did indeed suck. So yeah, I learned from that interaction. Wow, we've only got 2 minutes left. And I stopped. Remember when I came back from showing you my upcoming show? I didn't put my music back on, did I? God damn. What kind of producer? Okay. Putting in the spotting outlines of the areas that will be black on Black Goliath. We will get back to this next week. We will continue from where we're leaving off here. Sorry, let me have a zoom out. So what we did today was, let me switch off original Goliath. We did what we achieved today together. Oh my God, my Siri came on for some reason. This Siri's got a mind of its own. Will you please shut up? Okay, so what we did together, we put in all of the main inking lines of Black Goliath, and we've done most of the spotting, the areas that will be full black. Next week, we will continue and we will add in the hatching. And I'm going to save. Thanks once again for tuning in. Oh, sorry, someone came in. What's this? Oh, you've seen that already. William says, what's up? What's up, William? Another regular. You're on the Madness Entertainment Group. Indeed. I hope I've got a few more regulars out there. Thanks a lot for tuning in once again. This hour and a half goes past too quickly. So remember, on a Friday night, we have Late Night Art Attack, me and Raul. That's 1 a.m. Eastern, Saturday morning. Then it's back here at 6 p.m. for Supa-Saturdays. And soon, coming exclusively to Roku, will be Pack that I showed you earlier. So thanks once again for tuning in. I'm going to run a few more trailers for things that we've got going on here and in my other elsewhere comic drawing and writing. I hope to see you back here next week. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, peace.
If you like stories about truth, honor, and justice, then you should check out MAGA Man. It is Donald Trump as many now see him, the defender of justice and a warrior for peace through strength. MAGA Man is an all-American style 22-page comic book, so get over to fundmycomic.com and support the culture of truth, honor, and justice. With MAGA Man, the most needed hero of all. MAGA Man.
Ozzy, what are you doing? Come and have a look at this lovely book that was sent over.
You're wrapping in the perpendicular.
Oh, go on and spit the bat out your mouth. No one can understand you like that.
Say how 5 dentists and all.
Oh, well, that's not much better. Ozzy, why don't you sing to me? I can always understand you when you sing to me.
Fucking my brains. What is this my publisher sent me? Inked in black with art so sweet.
So what do you think? Do you like it?
Oh, Lord, yeah.
Thunderzone Comics returns. 5 all-new comics, Sumo Boy, Weirdo, Marshall Strong, Big House Blues, and Super Cross, plus a free how to draw characters from the Thunderzone. Bringing you back all 5 new releases. The Kickstarter campaign is live now.
Thunderzone Comics! Supa-Saturdays. 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 Draw-Along. Supa-Saturdays. 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 Draw-Along. I love heroes, no matter their age and no matter their size. I wanna be a hero, that's why I love to draw and I wanna create. Supa-Saturdays. 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 Draw-Along.
If you missed the live viewing of any Meg production, you can find all our content on Roku or as a member of this channel. Madness Entertainment Group.